Okay. So we'll kick off on time, but people do pile in last minute. So just as soon as I see the list of joiners stop, we'll kick off. Oh, that might be me. I'm sorry. I'm just going to switch off other windows so I don't beep when we're in progress. We'll be kicking off any second. I just see people joining us. So as soon as all those joining are in the room, we'll make a start. I was just commenting to Sandy that you've all got such pros now at the Collaborate platform that you're leaving it to the last minute to join, whereas right at the beginning, you were all here massively early. Anyway, I'm really keen because I can still see people joining us. We'll kick off in a second. Normally, I'm brutally rigorous in my timings because I like people to know that I'm punctual so everyone shows on time. But while I can see the system ushering you in, I'm reluctant to kick us off. I'll give it one more minute. It's really lovely to see you joining us. All right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start. Welcome everybody to the last keynote conversation of the week. I'm really sorry that it's the last session of your induction as far as renewal is concerned, but I'm thrilled that we've got three great panelists for you this evening, representing three research centres of the university. Just to share with my panelists, we've had an amazing week. The students are totally brilliant. It's really wonderful to see them right at the beginning of their journey, and they'll, I'm sure, ask you questions. And just on that note, please don't hesitate with the chat. Just jump on the chat, shove your question there if it occurs to you immediately. If you want to jump on the mic, just raise your hand and I'll switch your microphone on so you can join us. But don't hesitate, truly, truly, truly. These are three super experienced supervisors and they are fonts of knowledge. So yes, make use of them. So to my panelists, I'm just going to ask you to introduce your research centre super briefly and your research so people can locate you a little bit. And then we'll move to a conversation amongst ourselves. We're folding in students as we go. I know I've shared a couple of questions with you already, but truly if the conversation amongst us goes in other directions, that's very welcome too. It's really just an opportunity to share tips. What should all our new recruits be thinking about at this stage in the journey and what's up ahead along the path? So on that note, I'm going to hand straight over to you, Sandy, if that's okay. And I'll step back. I'm going to switch my camera off, but I'm here and we'll step in with questions if I see them coming.
Fine. Thank you, and hello everybody, and thanks so much for inviting me here. I'm from the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, and my name's Sandy Black. I'm Professor of Fashion and Textile Design and Technology, and I've been supervising PhD students for a long time. And our centre has been established for quite some time. It was founded in 2008. That was a year where there was quite a lot going on in publications of sustainable fashion. My first book, Kate Fletcher's first book on sustainable fashion, were published in that year, and quite a lot of activity started. So that's now in our 13th year. So I've put up a slide here that just shows it's a tiny snapshot of a lot of activity that goes on, and there's 5 research professors, including, I mentioned myself, Kate Fletcher, Dilys Williams, the director, Lucy Orter and Helen Story are the 5 professors, and we have other researchers, as I say, about 20 of us now. So a lot of experience. My own background before entering higher education was that I was a self-taught designer, knitwear designer, and I ran a business for about 15 years with an international label that's selling to prestigious stores everywhere. So I have a particular interest, and so do other colleagues who've also been, all of us really have been in industry, with the small business and the sort of creative design-led small business in the fashion space. And so a lot of my research has involved that sort of work. A couple of the projects are on this slide. The one in the middle called Fire Up was a pilot project where we engaged with 4 specific small businesses and with academics. So trying to make a more porous relationship between the fashion industry and small business and what might be seen as quite remote as sort of academia. So we're really trying to bring things very much into the real world. And the wording has, we are a diverse community of researchers, designers, communicators and educators. So there are 3 strands of the work, which is research, knowledge exchange and education. So we have I mentioned some of the researchers, and for instance, it's not just about, it's fashion design for sustainability at a core, but it's looking also much more broadly at engaging very wide audiences through public interventions. And although, for instance, Helen Story started as a fashion designer, she's become a communicator and arts practitioner who's staging interventions and is currently working, has been a designer in residence at a refugee camp in Jordan. So migration, climate, big issues are the challenges that we're trying to work with and also contribute to through creative practice of all kinds. And the research project I've just completed with my colleagues is fostering sustainable practices, and that has been working with nearly 50 micro and small fashion businesses, because we see them as the creative engine of sustainability and innovation and pioneering practices that really others can learn from it. But it's a very under-supported sector, so a lot of our work is also advocating for different areas and support for this type of business that is really innovating but is in unfair competition with bigger businesses. We do also work with larger businesses such as ASOS, Nike. Kering has been, the Kering Group has supported some of our education work. We've produced pioneering online courses in sustainability. The one shown on the screen, Fashion and Sustainability, is understanding luxury fashion in a changing world. So, and there's now a new set of courses called Fashion Values it's the first of 3 years of this project, and that's all available online. So do explore our website, sustainablefashion.com, and that will give you access to a lot of areas. There's also on the screen, it says A for accountability. One of the projects that we've recently done with the Condé Nast Group, which is the publishes all of the international Vogue titles. Really, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding that's written, and they have taken steps to help make more consistency in the sort of words and messages that are used. So we've developed a glossary which is available online to about 300, nearly 300 terms, and more will be continually added. So these are some of the contributions that Centre for Sustainable Fashion is making, and we're constantly developing our work. And as I said, I've supervised many PhDs, some of whom, a lot of whom are practitioners, so it's about 16 now who've done work in pattern cutting, textile, sustainable design, and we'll really bring in some of their stories into what we're going to talk about soon. So I think that might be my time up.
Fantastic, Sandy, that's really wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to hop on a slide. Finola, how's your mic? Are you there?
I think that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect,
Okay,
perfect.
brilliant. Okay, sorry, I lost sound for a few minutes. So thank you very much. And I think I interpreted the brief very literally with.
We just lost your sound again, Finola. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you've cut out. I'm so sorry. Yes, you're back, you're back, you're back. Try. Finola, do try your mic. No, bizarrely, we can't hear you. I'm just responding to your text message. I can see your microphone is there, but it's try your switching your mic off and on again. We have found that sometimes makes the difference. Yep, try now. No, still nothing. Oh no, I'm so sorry. We need your wisdom with us in the room. I think what I might do is ask you to sign out one more time and come back in. And meanwhile, we'll move to Kathy so that we get, hopefully, your contribution afterwards. So I'm going to jump on. And Kathy, how is your microphone? I can see you. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you too.
Brilliant. Okay, so hi everybody and welcome. I'm Kathy Lane. I'm a sound artist, a composer, and I also write about sound arts practice. You might have read the bio in the program, so I won't repeat that. But just to say a little bit about my practice, most of my artwork ends up as multi-channel sound installations, but I also make concert pieces. I rarely perform. I'm interested in voices, but not so much in the voice. And I'm interested in language and languages and how they're constructed and change according to many variables. So I'm interested in the stories that we choose to tell and how we tell them, as well as those that don't get told. And also those stories, they might be general stories about aspects of the world or stories about sound art itself. So my work generally combines oral history, archival recording, interview, spoken word, often sounded from existing texts, and environmental recordings. And it investigates history, environments, places, memory, and how things change through time, basically. So just to say a little bit about CRiSAP, Creative Research in Sound Arts Practice. CRiSAP's been a UAL research centre since 2005, and as you will see on our site and hear me say in every presentation, it's dedicated to the exploration of the rich complexities of sound as an artistic practice. I mean, I guess what I mean by that, or what we mean by that, is that when we started in 2005, there was very little understanding of sound art. It was kind of defined very much as a sort of technological practice, laptop performance, that kind of thing, or maybe as something in service of film or theatre. So really, over the last kind of 15 years or so, we've tried to investigate lots of different aspects of sound and what it can do as an artistic practice. So at the moment, we've got about 9 members, an administrator and 15 PhD students, including some of you new ones here. Hi. We've also got about 18 alumni, ex-PhD students, many of whom really, I'm really pleased to say, are still part of our community. Partly because sound arts is quite a small community, so we kind of need each other. We meet regularly in soirees where we discuss aspects of our research in an informal way, the occasional social event, and we also collaborate on events and research bids, and in general have a pretty active public programme. So you can look up at our website for more details about our research and also sign up for notifications on social media. But in the coming year, we've got a number of public events planned, many of which are part of a festival, Unearthed, a festival of listening and the environment, which is an ongoing series inviting a serious and playful interrogation of sound and listening practices. and how they might help us to reconsider our relationship with other species, the built environment, truth, and each other. The first event of this academic year is, as you can see on this slide, a discussion of sound, art, and urban spaces with invited curators from 5 international long-running urban sound art festivals to discuss the themes that drive their own work and also to discuss generally changing considerations of urban sounding. And this is part of an online exhibition which is also on our website, Acts of Air Reshaping the Urban Sonic, which we've called an online exhibition for offline participation. So the exhibition consists of 14 relational sound artworks by 14 different artists that all offer a means for you and everyone to go out and explore your own city of sound. So you need to register for this event. The link's on the website, and I hope to see some of you there. And that's all I'm going to say in the time I have got. Looking forward to discussing more.
Thank you, Kathy. You're reminding me how terrible it is that I ask people to produce an image when, if you're a sound artist, that's offensive, right? Why privilege the visual? And my apologies for making you conform to the visual.
Yeah, quite as far as offensive, but difficult.
Right, Finola, let's pop back to your slide and see if we can hear you. I know you're on JPS, so you're on site, so there's every reason why we should be able to catch you. Do you know my signal's not looking poor, so there we go. I can see you're connecting, so that's encouraging. Finola, are you there? I'm going to turn my camera off just in case the bandwidth doesn't help your connection at JPS. Oh no, Finola, I am so sorry. Right, so Finola is going to switch to her laptop and boot up from a phone rather than relying on university Wi-Fi. So let's see if that works, and we'll see how we go. I think I'm going to kick off with a question. So maybe Sandy and Kathy, I'm going to stick my camera back on so people can see us. And if you don't mind sticking your cameras on, 2 panelists, so that we can be bodies a little bit in the room. My first question is about advice that you offer your students in your first meeting. And I had phrased it when I was preparing, you know, what do you always tell students in your first meeting? But other research centre directors have come back to me saying, we would ask questions of our students. So it doesn't have to be what you tell people, what you ask people. How do you kick off when you first meet your students? What have you learned often is a good starting point when you're with your students for the first time?
Shall I go first?
Yeah. Yes.
I think probably like everybody else who's answered this question, I'm really interested in, you know, away from the kind of rigors of the application form and the Techne grant application and all those things, I'm really interested in what it is that somebody actually wants to spend their time doing in the next 3 years. And sort of what their motivation for that is really. And I think that's something that the supervisory team and the student kind of unpick, you know, over time, and it probably changes over 3 years or longer. But in a way, I sort of try and see my role as being kind of responsive in general. You know, if I was going to say anything to them, it would be, and this sounds a little bit harsh, I'm sorry everybody, you know, no one's making you do a PhD. And not only that, this is probably the only time in your life that you're going to get 3 years at least to focus on research. And actually, we're all quite jealous of that. So, you know, really, it's a time to kind of enjoy and make the most of, although it's a kind of slightly masochistic form of enjoyment.
Shall I carry on?
Please.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things I'm at pains to sort of discuss, obviously, we have to get to know each other, and that's a really great process. But really, to say that this is their PhD, it's not, unlike I think some other models like science models where there is a project. Usually, the students they come to us with their projects rather than they're working. Obviously, some people are working on specific projects, but often it's really I often say it's like unfinished business from doing a master's or whatever. But it's also, I talk about the journey, the fact that it is a journey that we're all on, the supervisors and the student together, because nobody quite knows where it's going to go. And it's not research if you do know exactly where it's going to go in lots of ways. So it's discovery, it's trusting in the process, it's trusting in each, it's got to be a really trusting relationship, and rewarding comes out of that. So, and there's often, I also say that and I probably wouldn't say this in the first meeting, but certainly as we go through, that they might feel a bit stuck sometimes at various points where it's not going so. But also, I've also noticed that there's always breakthrough moments. There's some wonderful moments as well where it all starts to really make sense, and the synthesis starts to happen. So, I mean, that's not the first meeting by any means, but it's all about the process, I think, and trusting that journey.
I think there's an absolute parallel there between the research project developing along its own course and the relationship with your supervisors developing along its own course. You can't second guess either, and you have to find your way, finding your way in dialogue with your team. And I totally take your point, Kathy, about advising and sort of supporting rather than leading. So maybe jumping in with instructions in your first meeting is not the first way to go. Fernanda is back with us, and I just want to check if we can hear her. Fernanda, please jump on your mic and see if we can hear you. Just seeing. I'm super sorry, not least because Fashion Business Research Centre is brand new, and I'm super keen to bring Fernanda in because she's got new to the university and she's got loads of experience, particularly with doctoral students. So we're really lucky to have her as an addition to university. Okay, she's going to try something else. So I'm going to move to another question, which is possibly, it picks up on when Ramia Maze was hosting some student presentations earlier in the week. She had a lovely piece of advice, which was totally pastoral and sort of extracurricular. She said, you should get a dog because it will bring you a lot of joy and get you out of the house walking every day. And Toshio, when he was speaking to everybody earlier today, was talking about diet, eating healthily and getting loads of sleep. So I guess around the sort of tips for kicking off, I'm curious about how you keep people healthy and rounded individuals and happy extra to their research so that their research is productive. Is that something tips on doing?
Well, it's more a question of just saying, life will happen, that they have to, it is always a balancing act, and that they also deserve, holidays, make sure they do take some holidays and not just work constantly, because so, and try to, enjoy. I do think that, going back to what I said about the breakthroughs, I think there are those moments where everybody, people do feel it's all worthwhile. I know it's a lot of hard work and a lot of support needed from family members and whoever is close. But yes, I think definitely looking after themselves and is very, very important. I would second that, no doubt.
I mean, I totally agree with you, Sandy, about the breakthrough moments. And what strikes me about the breakthrough moments is they always come at different times in everybody's kind of PhD journey. And they're often preceded by a horrible, stressful, blocky moment. And that might happen, it might never happen, hopefully, but it might happen more than once. And I personally don't really, I mean, I sometimes to my students, I just say you're not allowed to do anything on your PhD for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. It depends. It depends how bad they're feeling. But sometimes you just realize that people are just too on top of it. And it's all got a little bit too much and they really need to step away.
Yep.
So, yes.
It's just sort of managing that. I mean, I have a lot of practice-based students who are practitioners, and sometimes the balance between how much they do the practice and then how much they have to sort of stand back from it, reflect, write, and it's sort of managing those different types of activities as well, which throughout everybody's PhD, there needs to be different types of focus at different stages.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was just going to say, on top of that, I did actually have a discussion with one of my students yesterday, because I think there is, especially if you're a technically funded student, in fact, and I'm sorry for everyone that isn't, but there are lots of opportunities that Techni give you for kind of going out and doing this, that, and the other, and then if you're not technically funded, there are other issues that come in, and all of them they kind of all feed into your PhD potentially, because they're changing you as a kind of human, but they don't necessarily help with the linear process of your research. And I think there's a really big balance in how much to kind of say. I mean, obviously you want to say yes to everything that sounds exciting, but there is a really tricky balance between how much external stuff to say yes to and how much you need to kind of, for your own kind of mental health, really, play with the project.
Yeah. Yes, that is a really tricky balance, especially as it gets towards the end, the final stages, when I try and persuade people to focus and not to be tempted. There will always be more opportunities, and not everything has to be sort of embraced, because they get burnout at that point, or can. Shouldn't be talking about that though, should we? This is the beginning of the journey.
No, it's really important that people know it can happen, so that if it does happen to them, it's not, they don't think it's only them. I think Finola might be able to join us. I'm keen to invite her to the mic. Finola, try now. I can see your microphone. Let's see if we're gonna. You have a fresh. Try off and on with the mic one more time, because that has. Oh no, I've now lost you. There we go. Try now. It's really surprising, because I can see you present. I can see your mic on, but I can see the. So, Fernanda's just said, Kathy, that we need somebody with some audio genius. We could do with.
Yes. I'm actually wondering whether the microphone's turned up in her settings, but anyway, I don't think that's a.
Do you know, I can now see a tiny. Nope, she's gone again.
Oh dear.
Okay, do poke around settings. I should have thought of that myself. Sorry, Kathy, to make you come up with that too, in case there's an internal volume on your machine that can be flipped. I'm going to ask about registrations. A lot of people have described it this week as a hurdle, which of course it can be. And I always try and persuade people to think of it also like a catapult. So if you pull it back good and strong and put the time in, it does ping you forwards in a really good way. And maybe this picks up on the practice issue. How do you, when to focus on writing a registration, when to practice? What's the first task this term? What's that look like for your students?
I mean, oh, sorry, go on, Sandy.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, if they are practitioners, I think they really have to, get to grips with the get the registration form done and out of the way, and it lowering the hurdle for that, really. But it's a great opportunity for people to just re-examine in conjunction with their supervisors the aims and objectives and the sort of the big framing of the project, the starting point. And I have to emphasize it's just the starting point, because this journey can take lots of different meanders, and it can sometimes people develop, by the time they get to confirmation, the project has a slightly different focus. So it's not cast in concrete, but it's a sufficiently robust starting point, and that they shouldn't really spend, you know, the first term, if you're sort of, I think if you're full-time, that's probably the time frame, isn't it, that is looked for, and then the first 6 months if you're part-time. But that's sufficient. But it's good to go back and have another look and to re-examine it, and it's a positive building. See it as a sort of really a building, and not necessarily reframing, but consolidating phase.
Yeah, I mean, I find that most of our students have already got relatively established art practice. And one of the reasons they're coming to do a PhD is that they want the chance to really think about, rather than kind of making art to deadlines, moving on to the next thing, they want a really long considered time to think about the things that interest them the most, which is great. As a result, they often feel they haven't got enough sort of theoretical and scholarly learning. And I feel often that period running up to the registration and a little bit after, in fact almost to the confirmation, there is a sort of tendency to focus quite a lot on reading and trying to get some sort of contextual review, which is obviously necessary. But I don't like practitioners only doing that. You know, I think it's really, really important to start doing some practice within that framework, that kind of new framework, really early on as well. So yeah,
it depends on
hand in hand.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yes, in my experience, I have a different levels of different types of practitioners, because there are those where the research is being done through the practice, but there are those whose research is being informed by their practice and their knowledge of practice, and so it's not so much leading the way, and it really is a question of teasing out where that might sit, and that can go on for quite some time. But it's valuing the research content of the practice. Obviously, that's really important, to give people the confidence. But what they're often lacking in confidence is the engagement with the theoretical framing and so on, and that's where there's often support is needed and is given, and that can be one of the breakthroughs, where it's seen as not so big of a hurdle, not so scary a thing, without being patronizing. I mean, I think often people are practitioners because they haven't engaged so much with some of the sort of theoretical dimensions, or just the level and depth of reading that maybe a PhD does require. But everybody has that capacity. It's finding the right balance for each individual.
And I love that you're both book writers too. So just to reassure people who don't have a practice, or their practice is writing, you're in a room with great authors, my friends.
I never thought I would be writing books and writing so much when I was first. I was a designer, was a knitwear designer.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Actually, Kathy, I want to let everybody in the room know that Saima Tariq, who's one of the CRiSAP students who will be joining us for a methodology session in the core research concerns series, is an interesting case for me, because as far as I'm aware, and she'll tell us more when she joins us, that she started as a history theory, I'm just going to write the book, you know, my PhD is a written document, but she got so inspired by the company of CRiSAP as a research centre that she then moved into practice, and now there is a practice-based component. So just it's a nice example where
Yeah, absolutely. I call that practice concluded, because sometimes students don't, they don't intend necessarily to, but actually that can be exactly as you've said. So there's so many ways of these things being formulated. There's just it isn't. Every PhD is individual and has to be crafted and built, and it's a process. That's why I keep saying that.
Mm. I mean, it's really interesting, I think, with Sima, as she will say more, because I think there's also, there's quite a tendency to have quite a narrow definition of practice. And actually, one of the things that we're expanding all the time is what practice is. And I mean, one of the things, for example, we've been trying to grapple with at CRiSAP is one of our practices is listening. And that's a bit like saying one of my practices is reading, but we haven't quite got that far yet. But, evidencing listening as a practice or as a methodology, which Simon will talk more about, is extremely difficult, in fact. But, she came in a way with a background in journalism and had been working as a DJ, making podcasts, but she never really thought any of that was going to come into her PhD. And I think that's really, really interesting, when the fact that a lot of people come separating off aspects of their life. And hopefully, they will find a way for those things to blend together a little bit, a bit more holistically.
That is a great point, because and I said at the beginning, it's your PhD to the to the student. Basically, they are a whole person, and it's important to bring everything they can to it.
Can I ask you a maybe dread question about methodologies? I say this as a humanities person for whom methodologies is not often easy to articulate, and maybe practice-based, there's a similar conundrum sometimes how to articulate the methodology or methodology that feeds the methods. Is it a stumbling block that you find your students struggle with, or how do you navigate advising on methodology with your students?
I mean,
It can be.
Oh, sorry. I feel the word methodology is the biggest hurdle, because I mean, really, methodology is essentially, what are you going to do? When it comes down to its most basic thing, what are you actually going to spend 3, 4, 5 years doing? And once you sort of think about it like that, it's much easier to think about. I feel it's a kind of yeah, it's a word that freaks people out.
It is, yeah. It definitely can be, absolutely. But yeah, I think once people, I think once you start teasing out, yes, what is it? What is this about? What is it? What are you aiming to do? How are you going to go about doing it? And then they can be, they need to just read some texts that sort of perhaps frame these things in a more academic way. But often, what is so exciting is that our students are contributing their own methodologies, and that's one of the key things, is they're developing ways to research in this arts, practice, craft, design areas that that we're really building. We're building knowledge in this area, and I think so for so long our field, and particularly in fashion particularly, we've been struggling to sort of meet requirements that are imposed by other disciplines like science or humanities, that people are worried about, and they need looking over their shoulders, but actually they need to have confidence in being able to develop methods and methodologies and approaches that actually contribute something to the field.
Sandy, I'm glad you said it. I haven't said this. Oh, Fernanda, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. I'm glad I can come in on this one, because this is, I think, my favorite bit, which is
it's your thing, yeah.
It's my thing, and it's also, so I moved to UAL a year ago, and I had always worked at conventional business schools, and I was very excited about finally moving to an art school, because I've always drawn on creative methods. And I think that's the thing that people have to remember. First of all, we're in an art school, so by default you have to understand that we're doing creative work, even if some of that creative work has terminology that sounds pseudoscientific or whatever. And so because of that, the methodology is the easiest and the hardest bit. Oh, have I gone? No, I don't know. Have I
No,
gone?
you're perfect. I'm just bringing a slide
Okay.
in. So
So it's the easiest and the hardest bit. It's the easiest bit because as Kathy and Sandy said, it's basically what are you doing and why are you doing it, right? But it's the hardest bit because figuring out why you're doing it can be really difficult. A lot of that is because of just who you are, how you see the world. And the other thing that I remember saying to one of my former PhDs, who's brilliant, when she was getting very kind of tied up in knots about methodology, I said, you have to remember, lots of people have made their whole career about defining a tiny, tiny difference between one methodological approach and another. And so you just have to go, okay, some dude wrote this book and that's fine. They made their career in it, but I don't need to get caught up in these whole huge debates. I just need to figure out why I'm doing what I'm doing and then look for good terminology that helps
What's
me
relevant? Yeah.
articulate that. Yeah.
Yeah, just exactly what's relevant and necessary, but
Yeah.
not. I think people do get. Some people can get sort of a bit scared, or yeah, scared by all of that and
Yeah.
and worried. The terminology is worrisome for some.
it's tricky because sometimes the methodology is the contribution to knowledge, the introduction
It
of
is
a method.
absolutely.
So
Yes.
it can go either way. It can
Absolutely.
become massive, or it can just
Yeah.
need moving and moving on from.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think that's very much the case, that so many students have contributed. As part of their contribution has definitely been a methodology and an approach that.
Which is why it's hard to articulate at the outset because it's not there yet.
No.
Fenella, please address your slide. It's a beautiful image, and I'm glad you were picked one.
Okay, so I'll go backwards a little bit, and so I'm from the Fashion Business Research Centre, and we're the newest, so we're still kind of finding our feet. But our centre is really to provide a home for research that's kind of focused on fashion business, and with that in mind, I've tried to kind of move us away from disciplines and look for commonalities because we have really interesting specialisms. We have psychologists, cosmetic scientists, marketing, branding theorists, strategists, whatever. But essentially, what I've identified so far is the themes that kind of bring us together are around emerging technologies is one, well-being is another, circular economy and sustainability is another, and then the future of fashion business education is another one. So we are interested in the crossovers and the complementarities between research, knowledge exchange, and teaching, and that kind of they all kind of merge together. So that's that bit. And so we have various activities during the year, which I'll publicize through the kind of various networks. But the one that I want to highlight is that I run a weekly writing session, and that is a space. It's an online space. One morning a week, it switches around from week to week, where people can come together and do communal writing. And we've had practice-based people, we've got people writing blog posts, people writing papers, thesis chapters. So just if you want to join, I'll find a way maybe through Lucy and colleagues of publicising that. But I picked this image because I was trying to look for images that I think reflected how I feel about the PhD. And so it's this woman, one of our talented graduates, took this photograph of this woman kind of naked in a bath. And I think that, one of the biggest things about doing the PhD is we have to confront how little we know and how, maybe all of our lives we felt smart, but now, kind of we're really in uncharted territory and we have to be really brave about how little we know. And those little petals, I think, are the little bits of knowledge that we have to kind of immerse ourselves in so that we gradually kind of get somewhere with that. And they're beautiful, but also, we have some difficult times. And then a little bit of self-care, sucking her thumb, is really important, being kind to yourself and also surrounding yourself by other people who are in the same situation as you, even if they're not doing the same kind of PhD, but people who understand. And I think I heard my colleagues talk about that, the journey and the stages of the journey and how you feel emotionally about these different highs and lows that you encounter, and knowing that they're very kind of, I don't like the word normal, but it's expected that there'll be times that emotionally we feel really great and other times we just feel a bit lost. And the most important thing is to know that that is experienced by pretty much everyone, unless they're, you know, telling lies. And you can talk to people around you about how that's part of the process. So that's my slide.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to ask about intellectual property because it came up in discussion yesterday with our panelists, and there was a resounding feeling that to be generous, to trust, and it usually works out okay. But a student has brought to the table that it might not be everybody's experience, particularly if you are marginalized socially for any reason. You might be more vulnerable than was suggested yesterday. So can I ask you to address intellectual property and how, as a PhD student, you look after the knowledge that you're beginning to shape and bring to the world?
I mean, there isn't really very much in my experience that has been able to be the sort of classic protection of a patent. Is, again, it's often a science-based approach, and I think has only occurred once or twice within my own experience of design-led and fashion textiles-based areas. So it is much more about disclosures, and when and how to publish. And publication is often, again, is something that it doesn't always come naturally, and so has to be sort of thought through. I mean, so I think I haven't encountered great problems, I have to say, with any particular students. But they have been careful in terms of not disclosing too early, or leaving things until the PhD itself is finished sometimes, and then going and disseminating it when they have that behind them, rather than slightly too early. But it hasn't been a massive issue in my experience. Just taken with care.
Yeah. I think it's very tricky because I think, Lucia, as you were saying, a lot of what we do is collaborative, and a lot of, our ideas develop very collaboratively. And so it can be tricky sometimes. And I think I'm going to kind of twist it around slightly and say, sometimes I've talked to people and they say things like, oh, that person stole my idea. And the thing is, I've heard that idea from 15 different people, because it's an idea that's out there, it's circulating around. And what's important is, what did you do with that idea? So I think that if you are able to quickly find what I always talk about as your people, so people within the academic community that you feel that they've got your best interests at heart, they've got the same kind of energy around topics as you, then I think having those conversations are great. Because what you can do, I mean, I've in the past been able to move away from a kind of a stream of research, because I could see someone else was really active there and they were doing something really interesting. So I think that you have to both be generous and protective, but don't be too precious about your ideas, because ideas go out into the world, they circulate, they come back, and you don't necessarily own an idea. If that's what people are concerned about intellectual property, it's very different if you kind of publish a conference paper or present something at a conference, and next thing somebody co-opts that. And that did happen to me during my PhD, where, I mean, I think I can say this, but one of my supervisors submitted a single authored piece that I did that was out in the world as my work only, and wasn't really from my PhD, as his. And so that was very disappointing. So we have to expect that our supervisors are trustworthy, and we also have to know that, if we feel that our work has been co-opted by someone, we've got people to go to in the institution to talk to about that and get advice. I don't know if that's too negative a story to share at the beginning of the journey.
No, it's important. I appreciate that. Thank you, Finola. And I would, I would just going to put my hands up and say, as the convener of Renewal and a face for some of these things, I'm more than happy to hear from people that are struggling with things like that and don't feel comfortable in the supervisory scenario. I'm not the answer. I won't have the answer. I'll refer you to other people. But the university is a network of support. So if you don't find it where you expect to find it, find other people, and there will be help.
I just want to add I'd just like to add something to that, though, which is that I think there are, I feel I was going to say something that used the same words as you've both used, or you've all used, about preciousness. And, I think it's really important not to be too precious, because I think it can limit the amount of opportunities that you feel you can take up. But there are two sort of political things about this, which is in terms of the collaboration with your fellow PhD students. I mean, one is looking at what your citational strategies are, and this is something that we've done a lot of work on in CRiSAP together. We've discussed what our citational strategies are, and in a way that kind of draws attention to the fact that citation and reference is a really important thing. And we've also basically shared research. And I guess there's not a total relationship of trust between everyone, but what the sharing of research has done has allowed us to build on other people's research. So PhD students have come in, and we've suddenly realized that the methodology that would be really good for them is a methodology that one of our previous PhD students has already used. It might not be out there in the world, but that is really, really exciting, because then that really feels that we are building a proper research culture where we're kind of, sharing things in a really kind of intimate way, in a way, and working together on something and moving forward on it. So yeah, that's my contribution.
No, I hear the building of allies is super important. I think you have to build trust, right? You can't assume you'll be safe, but you learn on the journey, as we've discussed, who you can trust, and then you work. That's your gang, that's your network, that's your support structure, and they are the ones that will defend you going forward. So maybe some tentativeness is appropriate, but hopefully you will find the allies that are your gang. But also, the point about publication is also helpful, Sandy. I like the idea that if you're if you can publish on the way. People often don't appreciate that you can get a chapter out in the public domain before you finish, and that's another way of sort of protecting your ideas. We've only got 10 minutes, folks, and I'm keen to take questions. So I've just answered something in the chat, because I think it's a quick one, but if I've missed a source of where all sort of early titles before they are completed PhDs get announced, please jump in and correct me. But any other questions for our panelists about anything we've talked about, really, or whatever's you're nervous about or pondering? I'm super conscious this is my last 10 minutes with you all at the very beginnings of your research. So yeah, it's yours. Maybe looking ahead to Viva. Questions about that final stage? Because if you haven't, that's what I will ask you all to address, really, is what should you be thinking about now about that final process? What's early thoughts about the Viva? Do you want to share?
I think one thing that's really important is to figure out, I mean, even though it's really early, but start thinking about the kinds of people who might examine you, and what community you belong to, and therefore where you're going to contribute. Because what I've seen people struggling with is the PhD can go so broad, and part of that is who are the core people I want to talk to, and where do I want to make a contribution, and then that helps you really narrow it. But you have to think about, well, what would they expect? What would they expect me in terms of the literature I engage with, the approaches I take, so that it isn't something that you have to deal with right at the end.
I would think, in my experience, that it wouldn't happen right at the beginning, but it's on the journey to confirmation, that by confirmation, then you really would know who you really are talking to. Because I always characterize the journey as a meandering journey, sort of uphill. It slightly feels like going up a mountain, because you're exploring in so many different areas. So it may not be that focused, and obviously that focus is what you're after. And once you get to the confirmation stage, or very near to it, you've got to roughly the top of that hill, and you can see down the other side, and you can see where you need to go. And I think that's the point. That obviously it would be crystallized. It may happen before then, but certainly by then I would expect, you know, that the exploratory stages, it would all be starting to really come together, and a lot of clarity. And that then it'd be very clear who you need to talk to. But it's part of the conversation, is who is this for? Who are you talking to? You know, it's very important as to who might be the readers for this work.
I mean, there's a practical aspect to that as well, isn't there? Because for your viva, for your external examiner, you don't want anyone to have been very involved in your research.
No,
you can't
that's
have
true.
anyone very involved in your research. So, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say you need to think about your external examiner at this time. I definitely wouldn't say that. But it might be, you know, as the year goes on, it might be good to think about, that person's great. Do I want them as my examiner, or do I want them to be actually actively part of my research in some way?
Yeah, that is a very good conversation, a point. Then it's a very good conversation that to be had sort of in the fairly early stage, not right at the beginning maybe, but yeah.
Do people get that? So you can't be examined by someone who's involved in your work. There's a conflict of interest. So you can taint a potential examiner by getting into, you know, detailed discussions. It doesn't mean you can't have spoken to them. It doesn't matter if you've met them once, but you can't implicate them. You can't consult them on your project if you're going to work with them as your examiner. Just to clarify that, it does worry people, particularly if students are working in quite a small field. There's often an anxiety that everybody knows your project and therefore might not be able to examine. So it's something to navigate carefully, but in consultation with your supervisory team. Any other questions? Finola, I feel I want to hear more from you because we lost you at the beginning. Did you hear things early on that you wish you could have weighed in on?
No, I don't. Well, because I missed some of it because the sound was really distorted. But so no. But I think the really important thing is just to kind of, I think what somebody was talking about, you know, kind of not being overwhelmed by the process, and just kind of try to really develop a good relationship with your supervisor, figure out what kind of person you are, what kind of person they are, and then work with them to give you the support you need, and have discussions about your career as well as just your project. So, you know, where do you think you want to go afterwards? Because that might help them identify opportunities that you can take along the way, particularly if you want an academic career. It's good to think about that early and try to get some advice.
Yes, that's helpful, because I sometimes hear from students after they finish, sort of then saying, "Oh, now what? I didn't realize," and I tell them, "Oh, we have a section on completion," and it's hard to remember that the end is coming as you're, you know, charging straight for it. So the more you can think strategically now about what possibilities there are on the horizon post PhD, the easier it is when you've got your team with you and peers with you. It's often about peers as well as supervisory teams, where your opportunities post PhD might come from. You've been very quiet, everybody, and I know that you've been filled up this week with loads of information. But any questions or comments for our panelists? It's been lovely speaking to such brilliant supervisors this week. Tara, let me switch your mic on and then you can join us. Okay, you should be able to use your mic at the bottom, camera too, if you'd like to be visible.
Okay, I won't put my camera on. Yeah, apologies, I haven't been able to get to many sessions, so I'll catch up with them because I've been working this week and I haven't been able to change shifts. So thank you for the session, it was really interesting. I just want to pick up some thoughts on part-time. I did my MA part-time, and luckily I had another colleague who I worked really closely with, and that really helped me. But obviously the full-time people sort of went off in front of me, and I'm wondering how you handle being part-time and doing collaboration. I know that a lot of people are on a longer journey, but is there any thoughts on that?
Lovely, thank you.
Excuse
so
me.
my thought is to find somebody. It doesn't have to be an immediate peer at the moment, but ask around and find someone who's had very similar circumstances to you. So, you know, what is your overall, you know, the other demands on your time and all that kind of thing, and get them to give you some of the really good tips that worked for them in terms of finding the right balance and time. I think that's important, but also kind of figuring out what kind of opportunities you have to do things on your terms. So if you're not free during the day, is there a kind of monthly evening kind of writing session that you can set up? So when I was in the University of Birmingham, I set up a Tuesday night writing session because a lot of our students were part-time and still wanted a community kind of feeling. So are there things like that you can do so you keep in touch with a kind of relevant cohort?
Which is a little bit easier perhaps being online than it might be otherwise. But I mean, the positives of being part-time, obviously much more sort of time for gestation, which can be really helpful. But obviously there can be more demands on your concentration, and I'm always very impressed by how focused my students are when they've got so many different things, even, you know, childcare and or what other responsibilities as well. So it's doable, but it as you say, peer group is good. Establishing at least one buddy or somebody to relate to would be really useful.
And on that note, I would just advertise renewal for you all next year. So don't hesitate to come back, because you will meet you're right, absolutely right, Tara, cohort. You start as one cohesive group, and then, you know, there are different speeds. So come back next year and you'll meet a new gang of people, and the people you're going through confirmation with if you're part-time and they're full-time. So don't imagine that you're losing people just because, you know, the full-timers this time are racing ahead. The other thing I'll say, and it's my final word because we've hit 6 o'clock, is that if you're a UAL student and you have your college induction day tomorrow, chat to the students that you'll meet tomorrow that are a stage ahead, because they're also your buddies, you know, those or through your research centres if you're a member of a research centre. And coming to renewal sessions will also connect you with students later on, because they will give you their, you know, lived through experience. I'm determined to end on time, because then we know that people will join us rigorously in future, so I'm going to draw a line. But I just want to say a huge thank you to all our students for amazing stamina this week, and wish you all the very best, and to thank the panelists this evening for their really generous counsel. So good luck all, and see you back in a renewal session very soon.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Good luck, everybody.
Lovely. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to stay for a moment, folks, in case